Good morning and welcome back. I had the privilege of welcoming you last night, but I can't miss the opportunity of doing that again, and especially after Professor Simon Marginson's brilliant lecture, which I understood kept most of us thinking through much of the night. So, with that excitement already there, we have a packed program today. So I'm not going to take your time by speaking, except to say that we really are very, very privileged. We have Dean Robert Pianta, whose school we hosted with us. So I'd like him to come and say a few words to you. And I also wanted to acknowledge Gwen West, who is the Faculty Senate Chairman and who was there last night and is again here to support our efforts. Others will come during the day and they will be introduced. But let me briefly introduce our own very distinguished Dean Pianta. Robert Pianta is the Dean of the Curry School of Education at the University of Virginia, the Novartis Professor of Education and Director of UVA Center for Advanced Study of Teaching and Learning. Pianta and his research team have developed classroom assessment scoring system, a system to measure classroom quality in preschool through 12th grade. Class, as it is for shorthand, has tested and proven effective in several national studies and is being utilized by every Head Start program in the country. Pianta's work in teacher and classroom quality is nationally recognized. He has extended his work into design and delivery of professional development using web-based formats and interactive video, and focuses on teacher quality, teacher-child interaction, and child improvement. Pianta was featured in Malcolm Gladwell's article, Most Likely to Succeed, which explores what it takes to identify and develop a successful teacher, comparing the process to scouting future professional quarterbacks and citing financial advisors. Pianta was asked to provide recommendations for public education to the Obama presidential transition team in the fall of 2008. If we want to improve our students' learning, he recommended good teachers are what we need to improve quality of teachers and of teaching. Research conducted by the Center for Advanced Study of Teaching and Learning at the university shows that only about 30% of teachers really hit the mark in terms of offering students the kind of stimulating challenge and engaging experience that fosters learning. So we are truly very, very privileged to have Bob Pianta as our dean. And this new building is a legacy of his hard work and achievement. Wow. Yes.
Thank you for that introduction, Guevara. I'd like to make clear to everybody that when Malcolm Gladwell's article was titled Most Likely to Succeed, it had nothing to do with me and everything to do with selecting talent elsewhere. Well, I'd like to welcome you all to the Guevara Hall at the Curry School of Education. We like to think of this space in this building as the most beautiful building for a school of education in the country, and I trust that you'll agree with me a little bit on that and spend your time wisely and well here today. We're really, really pleased to have you join us here today, and it's a real delight to be able to share with you many guests from outside the university and friends inside of the university to share with you this space for the purposes of the conversations that are going to take place here today. As a dean now in a school of education in a university that is looking outward across the globe, I want to thank you for your time and attention to what is increasingly a critical focus for us, and the nature and role of the university at a time when global boundaries of all sorts are rapidly blurring and disappearing. both in my own work and in my observations of the work of others, many of whom you'll talk to today, we seem to be in this period now where we have this kind of intellectual, human, and social capital zipping around the world on all these rapidly evolving technological platforms that has created just an entirely different context for how one might think about higher education. And that's happening, again, it seems to me, you all know more about this, but it seems to me also happening at a time when higher education is taking a place in many cultures and economies around the world, including our own, as really being viewed as the linchpin of economic and in many ways social success. Putting those two forces together seems to me to be ripe for at least some attention of smart people to conceptualize what the framework is and try to identify for those of us that are trying to nurture and lead efforts some pathways forward that make sense. So I very much appreciate the engagement that you're all involved with in this particular topic and effort. I'm really proud of the kinds of things we're doing within the Curry School to be part of these conversations around the globe. Brian's leadership, Caroline's leadership, Diane Hoffman, we have many faculty involved here that have strong interests around the globe in various spaces, and I'm proud that Curry's involved with that. We've just launched a new website where part of one of our features of that site is you can click on and see where Curry is involved all across the world, and it's a very exciting possibility for us to think of the ways we not only reach out locally, but we reach out globally with what it is that we do. So thank you very, very much for your time and attention to these matters today. I'll see you in a little while as part of a panel where I will try to at least offer some perspectives from my own work, and I trust that your conversations that take place here today will be fruitful and help us advance our thinking about this. So thank you all very, very much, and enjoy your day.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dudley Doan. I direct the International Studies Office at UVA and also the Office of Summer and Special Academic Programs. It's a particular pleasure for me to welcome you this morning to this seminar. I'm both a Curry alum and I work in international programs at UVA now. I want to thank Brian Husser, who has been a very generous mentor to me over the years, and other Curry students and to Curry faculty. And one of the ways that he has been an extraordinary contributor to this institution is by introducing us to the work of Simon Martinson, Sheila Slaughter, Jimeno Ordorica, Erlina Suarez, Roberto Munoz, Yusiva Lima, and Kevin Kepner. And not only has he introduced us to their work, he has brought them to see us many times over the last 11 years, and we are better for it. Thanks to the Curry School staff for supporting us this morning. As you can see, this is a beautiful new facility. It has not, however, offered up all its secrets yet. And I will tell you there's been some discovery learning in getting everything alive and ready to go this morning. People have done a wonderful job, and we are grateful. Just a few housekeeping notes. This is a scarf that was found in the lobby. I will place it right here.
You thought.
Gwen, come on down.
I have to leave this early.
This is Gwyneth West, who's the chair of the Faculty Senate, by the way, a professor of philosophy. The restrooms are down the hall on your right. There are recycling bins in the hall. There is a coat room down the hall on the right. The door is open. In your folder, And if you don't have a folder, there are more outside in the lobby for you to pick up. You'll find a schedule as well as a document that has the bios, short bios of the speakers. Today's sessions are being videotaped. We will make those videos available on the web soon. Simon's speech from last night, the wonderful address he gave in the Rotunda, will be posted on the web, as will any other presentations and remarks that presenters wish to share. The schedule, I think, is pretty straightforward today. We will launch with panel 1 shortly. We'll have a brief break. Then panel 2 on balancing local, national, and global missions. At 12:20, we have UVA buses scheduled to meet us right out front of this building on Emmett Street. They will transport us to the Jefferson Scholars Foundation building, which is a lovely facility, and I know you'll enjoy spending the afternoon there. We'll have lunch there. Sheila Slaughter will deliver her keynote. We will then move to panel 3, funding the global university, and finally wrap up with a summation and some closing remarks. The bus will return to Guevara at 4:20, and we'll also make a stop at the Cavalier Inn. Okay. To my left is Richard Handler, professor of anthropology and director of the new Global Development Studies major at the university. He is the former Associate Dean for Academic Programs in the College of Arts and Sciences, a position he held for a decade, 10 years. He has been a great colleague. He's a wonderful mind, and we're thrilled to have him chairing this panel this morning. Julianna Guevara is the Dean of International Studies at the University of Richmond. She also holds a chaired professorship at the University of Richmond, and in our field of international education, she is legendary, to quote a good colleague of mine who sits here, Marina Market, and we mean that in the most positive way. Jussi Valima from the University of Jyväskylä in Finland is a professor of higher education. He also has been a visiting professor at USC, in California, Penn State, and Hiroshima University. To his left is our own Carol Ann Screen. She is a professor of education at UVA with a particular interest in comparative education and international education policy, and has been doing work in South Africa for many years now. And finally, we have Elinda Suarez from UNAM in Mexico. She's a political scientist and a senior faculty researcher at UNAM in Mexico. Thank you very much, and enjoy the day.
Welcome. Very highly ritualized introduction. We have 3 introductions. So, that's what an anthropologist would say. Let me just tell you, we weren't quite sure how to proceed with this panel, so I wrote up a few remarks that might take me 8 to 10 minutes to read, and then other people decided that they might write some things or not. So we'll go down the line and see who has what to say, and then we'll open it up to the audience. I knew the panel was about global citizens, or the panel is called Preparing Global Citizens. So this is what came into my head when I wrote my introductory remarks. Let me begin with what anthropologists call a native definition of a citizen. If you ask me, the native, I'd say a citizen is a member of a nation state. If pressed to elaborate, I'd add that a citizen is a person who is duly recognized as belonging to a recognized nation state. Such recognition operates internally and externally, which is to say a citizen is a person holding a valid driver's license and a valid passport. Starting from such a definition, the notion of a global citizen doesn't make much sense. Citizenship is about particularity, locality, political identity defined in terms of a delimited territory. The term global, on the other hand, denotes the whole world, as we might have said when we were children. Indeed, the term global rubs up against the term universal, which is the very opposite of the particular, the local, and the territorially bounded. So, it would seem that a global citizen is something of a unicorn. an imaginary being which cannot exist in what we sometimes call the real world. And yet in the current jargon of higher education, phrases like global citizen are in the air, or more particularly on the lips of those who are charged with burnishing institutional images, currying donations from international business elites, and maintaining websites. I recall one definition of the term in which the global citizen an institution aims to produce is said to be a person who speaks several languages, who crosses cultural and national borders easily, and who can feel at home or at least learn to get along in a culturally sensitive manner anywhere in the world. This, of course, is a fantasy, but it's a fantasy with a particular kind of socioeconomic location. It's a fantasy, moreover, which is rooted in modern notions of what a person is. To understand such modern ideas, I turn very briefly to one of my favorite passages from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. The name of Tocqueville's game is to compare hierarchical societies, which he called aristocracies, to individualistic egalitarian ones, which he called democracies. In a hierarchical society, the individual does not exist as a standalone unit, since every individual is part of the social whole and linked in specific relations of superordination and subordination to persons above and below. Moreover, in hierarchical societies, individuals are not understood to be alike, in the sense of sharing a common humanity. There's no vision of a common humanity, or not much of it. Since persons at different social levels are conceived to be different kinds of creatures, the peasant and the king, not to mention the angel, are simply not equally human in these kinds of worlds. In democracies, by contrast, each individual is understood to be a center of autonomous agency, equal in principle to all other individuals, and in fundamental respects like those others, since all are equally human. As we say in the United States, anyone can grow up to be president. But watch out for the Tea Party. We know, of course, where our preferences lie, since all of us who are educated in the school systems of democracy, of a democracy, know that hierarchy and inherited status are backwards and bad, whereas freedom and equality are modern and good. But Tocqueville, writing in 1840, was able to see the strengths and weaknesses of both systems by juxtaposing one against the other. And the following comparative observation is particularly apt for our consideration of the idea of global citizenship. In aristocracies, according to Tocqueville, people are linked tightly to those above and below. That is, as he puts it, they are almost always closely attached to someone placed out of their own sphere. As a consequence, he says, they are disposed to forget themselves, because the self in this world is not the primary reality. Democratic societies, on the other hand, are atomistic. Equivalent individuals live side by side, without much social connection one to the other. We don't know our next door neighbors. But they believe that all people everywhere are alike. The contrast between these social formations plays out strikingly in attitudes towards global citizenship. And here I take a longer quotation from Tocqueville. He says, in aristocratic ages, the notion of human fellowship is faint, and men seldom think of sacrificing themselves for mankind, but they often sacrifice themselves for other men. In democratic times, on the contrary, when the duties of each individual to the race are much clearer, that is, there's an idea of common humanity. In that case, he says, devoted service to any one man becomes rarer. The bond of human affection is extended to all, but is relaxed. Now, to me, this passage describes one version of global citizenship that is quite common in the United States and quite visible on college campuses. We were ready to pitch in to help people far away, usually by anonymously giving money, that universal medium of exchange, through a bureaucratic organization to people we will never know. But if you watch us walk our own city streets, skirting with embarrassment and furtive looks, the beggars on our sidewalks, you will see that we avoid like the plague personal connections to people who need our help. We'll engage in a bizarre ritual like biking for Uganda to demonstrate our common humanity, but we have no interest in making common cause in a socially sustained and continuous way with particular poor people in our own communities who might need our help and some of our resources. And to generalize from this example, the modern idea of a generic human being, or of all mankind, all humankind, to whom we are connected in good faith, is a peculiar one. It is not obviously the case that any one of us should be able to go anywhere in the world and relate instantly to other people simply on the grounds that we're all human. After all, what makes us human, anthropologists teach, is precisely what makes us differ from other people, our particular histories and cultures. And even if we have what we think are cultural skills, it's a fantasy to think we can make deep or meaningful or even practicable social connections to other people in an instant. It usually takes a while to become a part of someone else's community, and even more time if we wish to know how to work with them to help them achieve goals that they themselves think are important. Finally, the idea of the global citizen is not only fictional in its implications of a kind of instant rapport, it is deeply deluded, self-mystified, we might say, in its inattention to the privileged social position of those who aspire to be global citizens. When universities, for example, talk about producing multilingual global citizens who can cross all cultural boundaries, they forget that such imagery presupposes the existence of the benighted natives who, too poor to travel, stay home, where they can nonetheless live as culturally authentic monolingual locals whom we can visit and connect to as we choose. Global citizenship is really about the assumed rights of socioeconomically privileged white people to travel anywhere in the world they wish to visit and or to help darker-skinned people. After all, in American popular discourse, are illegal Mexican immigrants global citizens? Those are my remarks. I'll turn it over to the person on my left. Thank you. It's Julianna's turn.
I will stand simply because it feels more comfortable to speak while standing with prepared remarks. I also want to thank Professor Morrison for his remarks yesterday, but also for teaching me a lesson about using the visual. I, as you will see, do not have a PowerPoint, but his particular use of images was inspiring, so beware, don't come to my next presentation. A few days ago, we had a large delegation of top university administrators from a number of important institutions in an important Asian country visiting the University of Richmond. Their goal was to learn about such things as strategic planning, financial structures of a university, fundraising, admissions in a competitive environment, internationalization, and academic structures too. But observing the event was an excellent demonstration of profound and persistent cultural differences and how they affect everything we do. I wished I had some students observe through a one-way mirror, you know, the kind that you see on Law and Order. American speakers, almost without exception, began with the obligatory ice-breaking joke, which got no response from the visitors. And almost all speakers had PowerPoint presentations on the screen, which received no attention from the visitors, who, having very limited English, focused their gaze on the surface in front of them, where, among other things, they probably had translations of the PowerPoint slides. For American speakers, so focused on making connection with their audience, this was, of course, a challenging moment. I offer this vignette both as a cautionary tale, as we speak about the global world, and as a justification for starting in medias res and not having a PowerPoint. So what follows is a case study rather than a theoretical approach to the issue, but I hope one which has some larger implications. So let me begin the way Richard had. What does it take to be an American citizen? Most of us are tempted to say it takes voting and paying taxes. But of course, all it takes is being born here. I dare say Richard's definition would exclude a very significant portion of the American citizenry, and I'm not sure they would be amused. Of course, that birth in America is all it takes to be an American citizen, and only service in the military of another country could cause you to lose your citizenship. So what about global citizenship? One way to answer this question, and a pragmatic one, is to say that in today's world, we have no choice in the matter. We are, willy-nilly, global citizens. Yes, even the members of the Tea Party. Global warming affects all of us, no matter whether we believe in it or not, are informed about it or blissfully ignorant. An outbreak of the swine flu last year, had it materialized, would have affected all of us. Of course, the great plague of the flu in 1917. So we've not invented anything new. So you wouldn't have to travel internationally to get the swine flu. And the price of rice in China, that proverbial way of talking about something irrelevant. So the price of rice in China and of cotton in India will affect all of us. There are, in fact, already warnings on NPR, no less, about the fact that if you would like to buy somebody a Christmas present that is made of cotton, you better rush out to the store because there will be a shortage of cotton materials, the manufacturers turning to less expensive stuff. On immigration, you don't have to live in Arizona to be affected by it or to think about it. So, as in the case of an American citizen, I would say you can do good, better, best, bad, or mediocre. And I would suggest that that is a framework in which we may want to vote. So let me offer you a few portraits, snapshots, not long pictures. Will Cragen, class of '09, majored at Richmond in International Studies. 1 month ago, Will appeared on the pages of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, a number of other publications, because he and his staff of the International Medical Corps were first to respond to the horrendous rapes of 200 plus women in northeastern Congo. Will is affected in this work because he has spent significant amounts of time in various countries of Africa as an undergraduate and is fluent in Swahili. Last week, Will connected via Skype with some 50 University of Richmond students to whom he spoke about the situation in the Congo, his work, and how they could follow in his footsteps. Adnan Hajizada, class of '05, came to Richmond from Azerbaijan. He majored in political science and was very active in various student organizations and later returned to Baku. He's now in prison, convicted for hooliganism, because he and his friends had started something called an Azerbaijani youth movement. They're superb bloggers, and they published on YouTube a performance piece in which, dressed in donkey suits, they talked about the government spending large amounts of money to import donkeys from Germany. His father tells us that Adnan learned about the responsibilities of citizenship and the right to free speech here at Richmond. Fiona Ellis, class of '07, majored in French and rhetoric and communication. Eager to explore the world of international development, she volunteered for the Manda Wilderness Community Trust and the Wilderness Agricultural Project in northern Mozambique. The organizations operate an ecotourism destination designed to bring tourists to the remote parts of Africa, where benefiting the surrounding communities by improving their health, education, and rehabilitation is their goal. Sofia Jolanizada, class of '10, so she's not graduated yet, is in accounting. Sofia is from Kabul. She already was offered a job as a staff accountant with a US government contractor performing construction and consulting in Afghanistan. Brett Wigdor's class of '95, majored in the world politics and diplomacy. He's a native of New Jersey. After working for McKinsey, in Southeast Asia, he created something called Teach First in London, a better version, I dare say, of Teach for America, recognized very widely in the UK, which involves students from such universities as Oxford and Cambridge in teaching in the most problematic schools in inner cities. Finally, Vera Mascarenhas, class of '02, majored in economics and English literature, went to Columbia Law School, clerked at the International Court in The Hague, and then was legal officer for the UN War Crimes Tribunal in Sierra Leone. Currently works for an international law firm in New York. I could, of course, multiply those little snapshots. You could actually see them, this and a great deal more, if I had known about better uses of the visual, on our website, www.international.richmond.edu. I hope you will click on it. So what are the characteristics of these Richmond alumni? Two are Americans, born and bred, one of them living the life of an expatriate in London. One is Indian, another is Aryan, another Afghani. They majored in a variety of disciplines. But they all studied abroad, multiple times usually, and not one of them is monolingual. Swahili, French, Pashto, you get the picture. They all had the experience of living and studying in at least two countries and cultures, and all chose to become involved in work that addresses important social problems, whether it is their own native society or another one. It's very interesting. A recent article entitled Cultural Borders and Mental Barriers, the Relationship Between Living Abroad and Creativity, William Maddox and Alan Galinsky, Northwestern University, published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, presents empirical evidence from 5 studies that systematically explored the relationship between living abroad and creativity. The results were consistent. Those who had lived abroad were more successful in creative problem-solving tasks, very real, very reproducible. To demonstrate the solidity of the living abroad creativity link, Galinsky and his colleagues tested their ideas across several studies in the United States and in Europe, measuring creativity using standard psychological tests as well as real-world sources such as entrepreneurial ventures and product innovation. Research results showed no correlation, either positive or negative, with travel abroad, but did show a positive correlation with study abroad of some significant length. In interpreting the link between living abroad and creativity, Galinsky and his colleagues point to the ways in which multicultural experience disrupts routine knowledge and problematizes it while it gives one access to new ideas, new ways of interpreting reality, new ways of being. Anyone who works and studies abroad and has spoken to students returning from abroad will probably agree that before even speaking about the country in which they studied, students focus on how much they learned about themselves and about the US. Developing an ability to identify simultaneously with the home and host cultures that results in positive impact on creativity as well as entrepreneurial innovation are the conclusions of Galinsky and his colleagues. So I dare say we can conclude that there's a kind of mutuality between globalization and creativity. Globalization drives creativity, and creativity drives globalization. An interesting circularity. But in none of these studies is there a suggestion that living or studying abroad results in a commitment to work which addresses societal problems. What then do the stories of these 5 Richmond alumni tell us about the relationship between the education we offer students and global citizenship? I should correct this and say, what is the relationship between positive, good global citizenship and the education we construct together with our students? This brings me back to the University of Richmond, a small, 3,500 students, institution composed of 5 schools, the arts and sciences, business, leadership, law, the only graduate program, and continuing studies. The heart and essence of the university is its focus on liberal education, which has traditionally and insistently embraced a wide range of knowledge, including knowledge for its own sake, and a commitment to purposeful working knowledge. Liberal education has, for example, traditionally included and stressed education for good citizenship, as well as the education of a complete, complex individual. To illustrate the evolution of the university, which I believe demonstrates the transformation of higher education in the last 20 years, at its best, I hope, let me focus on one aspect of it, which is of particular interest to us today, international education. Or better put, the internationalization of the institution. When I was asked to create the Office of International Education 22 years ago, we had some half dozen international students and about a dozen students who ventured abroad. Now, international students constitute 9% of the student population, and some 60% of undergraduates study abroad. Very importantly, among the faculty, there are very many people who were born, lived, worked, and done research all around the world. Why and how did we get from there to here? The answer to the why must begin with a group of faculty who understood in the 80s that excellence in education is no longer compatible with a provincial institutional identity. Out of this conviction grew both the creation of the office and an institutionally funded faculty seminar abroad whose goal was to re-educate people who had neither knowledge nor experience of the world. Not people in specific disciplines, not specialists in area studies, but anyone and everyone who understood and was prepared to join a new educational imperative of preparing students for a very different world than the one for which they had been trained and which they understood, in a and the creation of a multidisciplinary intellectual community that in the faculty, and that is what the seminar has been contributing to over the 20 years. Internationalization at Richmond has been based in what we call a comprehensive and integrated approach. Study abroad international students, curriculum internationalization, and faculty development, as well as service learning, languages and literatures across the curriculum, are all parts of that evolving institutional culture. We believe that the presence of students from more than 70 countries around the world enriches the learning and lives of all students, both in and out of the classroom, and that is why we have committed ourselves to offering financial aid, both merit and need-based, to international students. We have also concluded that in the 21st century, study abroad should be an integral part of a Richmond education, and therefore we need to create access to semester study abroad regardless of a student's financial status, so all institutional financial aid is applicable, and we offer a travel stipend, pay for passports and visas, etc. And that it should be available to anyone in any major. And in order to make that possible, we have signed agreements with more than 60 universities around the world, so a chemistry student can go and study chemistry at Melbourne, for example, where there are more chemists and more courses than our institution can possibly have, and of course a great deal more happens there. This is also true for other majors, and so our students can go to Chile and Argentina, Brazil, and China. And the preparation for study abroad begins on campus in the interaction with international students and faculty, in the courses with international content, in the work students do in the increasingly international community in which the university is located. So international education is not synonymous with study abroad, rather it is the combined result of what is happening on campus before it, what happens abroad, and what happens on campus when students return. It is important to note that in a time when globalization of higher education is happening all around the world, and English is increasingly the lingua franca, our students, yours and mine, do not have become completely fluent in French, Chinese, or Italian to be able to go and study in the countries where the language is spoken, because there are some courses in English created with local students in mind, which they can take while they continue developing their linguistic facility. My new kit is on the glory and beauty of speaking foreign languages badly. I think that's very important. I will be glad to explain. So, our students go and study abroad. The resulting boost to their creativity as much as new academic knowledge and cross-cultural skills make these students more employable, yes, and we believe better global citizens, giving them a real sense of belonging in the world. The October dedication of the Carol Weinstein International Center at 21,057,000 square foot academic building is both a symbol of institutional commitment to internationalization and an important demonstration of the complexity of what we are undertaking. At a time when liberal education and the humanities seem to be under-resolved as a result of economic contingencies, at least that's what we were told, we have two departments of literatures, cultures, and languages in the new building: geography, international law, 4 interdisciplinary programs, ESL, cultures and literatures across the curriculum, and the Office of International Education. But the center is designed to serve all schools and all departments on campus. And part of its agenda is to use new cutting-edge technology to expand collaborative teaching and research involving our faculty and students and faculty and students partner institutions. Across from the beautiful Center for International Education is the new football stadium. And we are about to complete an expansion of the business school. I say this because I believe that global education and an education for global citizenship must encompass a liberal education as well as business, leadership, and possibly football as well.
Thank you very much. Lucy?
Yes, thank you. I want to prefer standing. Kiitos kutsusta tähän seminaariin. Tack för att ni har inviterat mig till denna seminarium. Vielen Dank für die invitazione an diese seminarium. Grazie per l'invitazione della questa seminario. Thank you for inviting me to this seminarium. I'm really pleased and honored to be here. I understood that I understood my task of speaking here today as thinking about what it requires to educate global citizens, and that's what I'm going to speak about. But I think that I need to say something to contextualize my argument. I come from Finland, in a country which is one of the Nordic countries with Nordic welfare society, where there's a very strong emphasis on equality and also the equality of educational opportunities, which means that we have tuition-free education and healthcare and good system and things like that. So I come from that part of the world where we see that the role of society is to distribute wealth in society. So this is the contextualization, and my starting point is, I take this from Manuel Castells. According to Castells, social structure is global, but most human experience is local, both in territorial and cultural terms. I think this is interesting in a way that he emphasized global social structure, which we all know, and I think that if we think what is globalization, I think that every human being knows the climate change, the global cultural trends, ICT, internet, global economic markets, which influence everybody's life. It's creating a new kind of social structure, which Sandra Martins, I think, also tackled yesterday. But the human experience is always local. And I think that is
important to remember because we human beings live in our local communities. And it seems that the social ties that we have in our local communities or the local experiences are something which is quite easy to see and understand. Whereas what seems to be happening is that the definition or understanding of national is being redefined. Not only in Europe, being part of the European Union, which is quite familiar to me, but it's being redefined globally. And I would say that maybe national is becoming more like an abstract concept, which is not necessarily anymore structuring social experiences of human lives. What I'm not here interested in trying to define what is a global citizen. But here I'd like to hear in the intellectual home of pragmatism, I'd like to ask, what do the global citizens need, and what global citizens needs to be able to do? I was born in 1950s in a world which was quite easily explained, thanks to Karl Marx especially. It was easy to understand the development of societies using the Hegelian philosophy of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and replacing thesis with social classes. It was easy to locate oneself in society, into certain class, and identify oneself as part of the social class, which is part of the society constructed from classes. And as research categories, these social classes were also very handy, and some people still use them. Because then you would explain how the society works. Well, actually this has been criticized as methodological nationalism, but in a way it also, through these intellectual devices, it helped to define nation state as a normal category for human beings. It was also easy to use these in cultural terms because everybody knew that capitalism was bad and worker was good, or the workers were bad and the capitalists were good. So life was pretty easy in that way. But what is the problem now is that these old categories like labor versus capital, communism versus capitalism, free society versus totalitarian society, they are losing, or they have lost their exploratory power, especially in the context of local experience, in the context of human life. What we have instead of these grand, previous traditional grand social theories, we have theories of globalization, theories of knowledge society, theories of network society, and these, for me, these are more like analytical categories which are both too complex and too simple to be used for understanding local experiences. What I mean by too complex? Well, by too complex, I mean that in addition to that the traditional categories do not work anymore, there are no clear dichotomies like social class, capital versus labor, etc., which could be used to explain what we see and feel happening in our society, in our environment. And they are too simple because the concepts like knowledge society, knowledge economy, networks, network society, globalization, they are not only academic concepts, but they are also common language terms. They are too vague to be used as exploratory categories or as rigorous academic intellectual devices. Because basically they say that knowledge is used everywhere and needed everywhere in society and economy, or that people live in networks, or that globalization is everywhere and it influences everywhere all over the globe. So, what can we do with that kind of understanding of the world? But yet, these conceptualizations, they are helpful intellectual devices which challenge us academics to try to operationalize these broad concepts into practical research questions which can be examined analytically. And this I see is the problem with these emerging grand social theories. So this is more like an introduction. So what does this new situation require from higher education institutions? What are the challenges that we should face when we are trying to educate our citizens? I think that there are two main challenges. First, we should be able to educate people, citizens, who are able to understand the nature of global changes taking place, and who are able to live as citizens in their local communities without losing hope for their ability to act. What would this require in more practical terms from higher education institutions? Well, this is what I'm suggesting. First, we should make our students or our citizens being able to learning with uncertainty. If you think historically, living in an uncertain, unpredictable world, this is nothing new. This is the normal human condition before the era of industrialization. Because during this short period, about 100 years, we developed devices to predict and control our environment. But now when we are living in a post-industrial world, I would say that this uncertainty is coming back. We are no longer able to see, to predict what is happening in the world. Facing this challenge, I think it also requires taking seriously theoretical attempts to explain society. Despite the fact that I criticize the present social theories, I think that they are the best, well, maybe the best that we are having today. And we have a theory, we need to create theoretical understanding which will help our global citizens to understand the big picture, the social forces, the social dynamics that are shaping our world. Because this, in a positive way, this can help people to see how these social forces, these social dynamics influence their normal lives. It helps to citizens to have a perspective into their lives, into society and global world. So it increases, hopefully, social global sensitiveness. And translated in the university education, it means that we should try to educate citizens who are theoretically sensitive and practically competent. Not only in terms of generic skills like analytical reasoning, critical thinking, etc., but also in terms of taking seriously one's individual development as human beings, as global citizens. And here I'm making reference to the whole idea of building, the idea promoted by the Humboldtian universities. And the fourth point is that lifelong learning, I think, is becoming more crucial in a rapidly changing global world. What is crucial skill in lifelong learning is, of course, the ability to learn how to learn. And lifelong learning, I think, is too easily understood as updating one's skills to be able to re-enter or in labor market. But I would like to emphasize the need for more humanistic understanding of lifelong learning. Because if we see from this perspective that human capital, it should not be understood as a private good. It should be understood as a capacity of society to adapt to changes and increase citizens' capacities for public good rather than individual interest, which is gained through education. So, and what would this kind of university look like if all this comes true? I would like to say that the university idea would be something like Humboldt University Global, actual hub. And this hub university would be able to educate globally competent citizens instead of trying to create global citizens. Thank you very much.
Well, that was a marvelous acronym with which we ended. I think that'll haunt the rest of the conference. Carolyn?
I'm going to take liberty to, since I was invited this weekend to give this paper, so I basically have a semi-structured talk, and it's not as theoretically coherent as some of my colleagues, but I'm going to sit here because I'm Italian and I tend to wave my arms and pace all over the place, so this will contain me. But what I did think about this weekend, so after Simon's talk last night and reading Richard's comments before today, I took the position that I really want to take this idea of what the idea of public space for universities and what their role is and what that means in a global space. And then Richard's challenge of can we actually prepare global citizens, or are we just preparing upper middle class white kids to travel around the world on study abroad? And those are the two kind of most interesting challenges that I think I'd like to kind of pick up on today. One thing I wanted us to think about was what are we talking about when we talk about globalization? Bob Swap and I teach a class, and we ask the students all the time, how do you define globalization? And it's amazing how it's, they talk about technology and they talk about the kind of flattening of the world. This is Tom Friedman's notion of things, but they talk about it in a pretty unproblematized way. And I think it's really important to think about what globalization is and what definitions we mean when we talk about it. And I think that we kind of pretend we're all on the same page, but we have really different ideas about that. I just want to put that out to think about. My concept, and something I want us to plan about, is globalization isn't new. We also talk about globalization as this thing that descended upon the university in the last decade or so, and that here we are, and we've got to grapple with this new thing, but globalization has been around forever. People have been traveling around the world and doing a lot of things and working together, and universities have been collaborating. Humboldt University has been very influential here in my view. And so I want to put that out there. Colonization, imperialism, the way people have related to each other around the world has existed for a long time. But there is something that's different that I think we need to grapple with, and that's the rapidity with which we're interconnected. And that's really, really different. The idea of the internet, the idea of the phone, the idea that you can get on a plane and be any place and any time is a really, really important thing to think about. But we have to think about globalization not as a destination, but as a process. And I think I did not steal your notes, but you will see a lot of similarities between how we talk about global citizenship and where we are today in this world. I also think that many people disagree about the effects of globalization. As Richard suggested, whether there could be a global citizen and how we impact, how we think about our role in the world is a really, really important thing. And we tend to kind of talk about globalization here in this country as this inevitable bandwagon to get on, and we just have to figure out how to fix it. But we don't like to talk about it in terms of how it undermines people and culture around the rest of the world. We don't like to talk about it as a new kind of imperialism. You'll get kind of where I'm coming from throughout the rest of my talk here, but I think it's really important to talk about how globalization differentially impacts people and communities around the world. and higher education's specific role within that. And we tend to kind of think of it as a very benevolent endeavor, but it also is a very deleterious project too, and I think that's important to put on the table. I believe global systems as they exist through higher education help perpetuate inequality through power and privilege over what knowledge is valued and recognized, through ideas of competition and capitalism, through economic systems and structures. For me to understand globalization in higher education really requires that young people understand what they do in this world and how this affects the lives of other people. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the pedagogy around that. I have 4 basic ideas that I wanted to share today. And the first is this notion of globalization as it stretches our foundations of knowledge. So let's get at other forms of knowing and being. So as technology connects us and brings us to different places around the world, how do we take that into universities? And I think somebody last night at dinner said, oh, well, 98% of the faculty would agree with everything Simon said about the space of, and I kind of went, universities are not fundamentally about change. And they're not fundamentally about looking at other forms of knowledge. And they're not fundamentally about breaking down these barriers. We're about, we've colonized the space, we're going to own it, and we're going to take risks. This is our thing. We're not about trying to open up and challenge the way we think about the world. And we're set up very specifically to do that, so I want to talk about that a little bit. The second thing I want to talk about is we're in this age of accountability, and particularly in America. And I think for those of you who are visiting here from overseas, it's really, really important to understand how we're viewing higher education under this new kind of measuring outcomes. What's the value added? What are we doing? We are in an identity crisis of do we make a difference? That's the backdrop with which every decision that we make about educational planning is made. And we tend to, and this is a global thing too, but we've embraced this in the United States, and faculty have embraced it. And I think that's something that's different. There's a big pushback in other institutions around the world challenging these notions of accountability. We've just kind of said, how do we make sure we do it the best? Instead of challenging these ideas about we're going to measure learning outcomes and we're going to look at what difference that we've made. And I think that's important to discuss as well. The third thing I want to talk about is what does it mean to be a global citizen? And this is kind of what Lucy was talking about. But looking at the idea of a citizen versus somebody who is globally competent, or we tend to, in this country, talk about global competency. So what are the skills we need to develop? What do we need to do to be more globally competitive? But I think it's important, Richard, to go back to this idea of what is a citizen? What are our obligations, and think of social responsibility? And I think Lucy was laying out some really interesting ideas around that I want to play with. And the last is, if I have time, I don't know, is speaking from the perspective of an education school. We're mostly higher ed and administration, but really it starts much younger than universities. And so I just want to put that on the table too. All right, so my first area to talk about was this idea of foundations of knowledge. So within higher education, all of our investment and identity is discipline-based. Our rewards, our incentives for promotion, our ideas about self and ownership of ideas. We're not collaborative. When you co-author things, you don't get as much credit for it, right? When you work with people around the world, it's kind of seen as you're on some kind of boondoggle, right? And I think it's really important to think about the kinds of rewards and incentives that are put into place around publishing are very English-oriented, very American, northern perspectives about what counts as important knowledge, what is value. Now we're talking about the high-impact peer-reviewed journals, and we're talking about an English-only world. And if we're talking about globalization, we're talking about other ways of seeing and knowing and doing and being and respecting, it's really got to change that. And that's a fundamental structural thing that we don't tend to talk about. We say, oh, well, we're going to publish our articles over here, but we're going to talk about indigenous voices. But it's really not about changing the way that that information is put out there and it's shared. Globalization requires that we recognize others in the other 4/5 of the rest of the world and the ways that people there do things. We need a fundamental restructuring of teaching and learning in higher education. And I think, in the next 15 or 20 years, we're talking about significant global changes in terms of, political violence, in terms of climate change, in terms of the way that we're restructuring the political order in the world. And this idea, and Bob and I talk about this a lot in class, real world problems know no disciplinary boundaries. So it's not sufficient anymore to talk about medicine in a really limited, narrow way. It's thinking about the relationship between society and medicine and relationships between different disciplines. Friday night, I was listening to National Public Radio, and they had the new NSF director. Did anybody hear that? He was from India, and he was talking about science and society are intimately interconnected, and we can't think in different spaces about them anymore. And we've got to find ways to bridge this information and the way that we learn to do things. And yet, when you think about how universities are structured and organized, we don't work in ways that bridge these things. And it's because of the incentive systems, but it's also what we feel comfortable with and how we do things. He argued for interdisciplinary approaches to solving problems, and then he talked about how funding structures privilege some voices and some kinds of research over others, the vast amounts of money that are put into applied sciences versus social sciences. And, there's not a lot out there that encourages people to work together. And he talked about the great inequity in distribution of resources within the academy, so even within institutions, not just outside of institutions. So I'll just put those out there. The second area I was really thinking about was this idea of global citizenship and competency. So coming from outside the U.S., there's this imperative to understand these fundamental market concepts and how higher education is managed here. The language here is largely based on this very instrumentalist idea linked to competition. We had Mark Warner, the former governor of Virginia, who was here at Curry School about a month ago, and he talked about globalization, and I thought, oh, this is great, he's talking about international education. And his whole thing was China and India are going to get us. If we don't do this, then we've got to make sure that we get our standards up, and we want every single kid in the state of Virginia to be more competitive globally. And I thought, we're in a financial crisis. People are melting down. Families are, falling apart. And we're not talking at all about human values. We're worrying about China and India, and we're not caring about the things that kids are going through. Right here in Charlottesville, we have a poverty rate of 40%. 40% of kids live in below the poverty level in this community. You would not know that walking through this building. And we don't talk about that. We're worried about China and Japan. Well, not Japan anymore. That was 20 years ago. That was our last threat. but really thinking about what this world is and what our responsibilities are and how we relate to each other is not part of how we talk about globalization. Fernando Reimers, who's at Harvard, has written a whole bunch recently in the Chronicle and a lot of talks about global education. But he talks about hard and soft skills, and I think this is kind of where Lucy was speaking. The hard skills, he talks about disciplinary knowledge in complex fields like political science, economics, history, literature. But he also talks about language skills, and your introduction in multiple languages points to the fact that we in this country do not care about language. It's not a value. And in fact, when we do have opportunities to have kids who are actually bilingual, it's all about transitional English. Make kids more successful within an American system. Let's get them through. And it doesn't value their culture, their diversity. It doesn't provide dignity for other ways of knowing and doing and being. And this is an untapped resource in our universities, but in our K-12 system as well. We have incredible resources from around the world here that just become homogenized or basically integrated into the American system that does not serve us well or those students well. Another thing he talks about is deep knowledge and understanding of world history, geography, and global dimensions. Americans always are way behind the rest of the world in their geographic knowledge and in their understanding of world politics. Then he talks about soft skills and this idea of knowledge and dispositions, right? This openness, interest in having a positive disposition towards other people, tolerance towards cultural differences, recognition and being able to negotiate across different contexts. Now these are the things that are really, I think, the nuts and bolts of being a global citizen. But why don't we value those things? We can't measure them. They're really hard to measure. So in our age of accountability and the way that universities have to prove they're doing something, when you want to talk about knowledge and respect, Lauren, where's Lauren? Lauren's my doctoral student. Okay, 5 minutes. Okay. Lauren is trying to measure the impact of civic engagement and study abroad on students. And you can't just do it from a survey. She'll tell you. You have to understand how they're using this. What are they doing? How do they negotiate? And you can't do a survey to do that. So administrators aren't interested in it. But yet this is what we're really talking about. It's dispositions towards the world and understanding your place and role and responsibility in it. Sorry, I'm going to skip to my third. What is the value added of higher education? So to go back to Simon's point of higher education as a public good, and here in this university, we talk a lot about community engagement. That's our public good. So we're going to go and we're going to volunteer at Madison House. We're going to go fix the poor community. But it's always from on high. We have this idea that we're going to stand where we are, but we don't have to change who we are and reflect on what we do in those positions. So thinking about what universities can and do, and how do they relate very differently to thinking about the community is something that this university is really struggling with and thinking about. There's a lot of conversations going on here about how do we relate to and work with the community in more purposeful and respectful ways that aren't just about going out to do something. Because we do have this very, again, instrumentalist approach to working within the community and serving the community. I think it's really important to think about the investment in higher education in terms of per pupil expenditure, right? If we look at what we're spending on each individual person versus, and the individual gains that they receive as a result of that versus what is the benefit to the society or to the community? How does the investment per person that we're making in students here benefit the greater society? And that's going to be the real question in terms of thinking about the public good of higher education. How is this impacting change and different kinds of relationships and ways that people respect and work together? My last point. One thing I want to also put out there is there are a number of people around the country that are thinking about this and looking at this. There's organizations like the Asian Society, the Longwood Foundation, there's partnerships for 21st century schools, there's the business roundtables. Now again, you have to think about what their definitions are of globalization and of citizenship and what is the impetus behind these different movements. But there is a push to think about global competencies and global awareness. But my request or call to all of us is to think about ways of challenging that so those ideas become much more purposeful and intentional and really bring in a global citizenship. Like Richard was, I guess as Richard was raising, that isn't just about privileging American students to travel around the world or privileging the structures that exist, but actually to change those structures and think differently about how to educate people. And that requires a fundamental transformation about how higher education is structured. So I'll leave it there.
Very good.
Hi. Hola. Well, I come from Mexico, and well, I know you know my context, because Mexico is very near for. Well, I hope you know. Well, first thing I want to say is that I prepared a very formal paper, and when I come here, I knew I don't want to be global is to talk. So the first thing I want to say is that I try to understand what Simon said yesterday, and to hear and attend all what you say, and try to make my own points from yours. So I'm gonna say, first thing. The first thing is that when we are talking about citizens, we are talking about human beings with ethical and political rights and duties. Thus, to develop citizenship in and from our universities, first we have to be citizens. And I know that we are, and if we are doing our duties and responsibilities. The first step we have to take also is to debate about values and actions. If we don't do this, what we will be doing when moving our universities to be global, whatever it means, is to increase the gap between our stated values and our practices. With such a starting gap, how could it be possible for any higher education institution to contribute to prepare citizens, name it global or not? The second thing, I am moving the paper in order because this morning, classification of universities is used not only in the study of higher education, to describing institutional diversity, but to produce and reproduce hierarchies that ensure different places and representations for institutions and individuals. The point to stress here is that placing global university as a superstar in the academic scenario is an ideal weapon for social distinction, and I am following here what you do. This represents a driving force which divides the world into superior, let me say, those who speak English, and inferior, the other cultures. Here, my question is, from an ethical point of view, what will be the consequences of making distinctions between global citizens and any other countries? It is possible to have first-class citizens and second? I only want to say you something, to share with you some of my data. My research field is young people. I study dark hairs and all these kind of tribes in the world. And Mexico is a Spanish-speaking country. Within total population of college students, only 35% are English speakers. In the private Mexican universities, this percentage reaches 42%. As we can see, most Mexican college students do not represent the perfect candidate for my convocation for studying in global universities. But when asking them if they would like to do so, most of them answer affirmative, independent of their English-speaking capacity. What here appears is that nowadays, for many Mexican college students, the sense of needing to belong and establish relationships with the so-called global society is turning critical. In the present time of Mexico, the discourses of global universities have produced the need to take distance from global groups and a kind of aversion towards local lifestyle. This has logic when you feel that your country and culture are increasingly considered inferior. Then, the other point, let me see, the third, young people. Young people all over the world are being pushed to put themselves first. Students of higher education institutions are exhorted to expect making lots of money and perhaps even to be famous in a world where good jobs are hard to find and harder to keep. So nowadays, the not so hidden goal of higher education is to develop the basic instincts of competition and winning. In this context, to develop citizenship in students and also in faculty and directors of our universities demands to drive against the hegemonic forces that are defining and giving meaning what higher education is for, and also what the term of global means. The question is, are global universities prepared to take this challenge? Are we prepared to drive against these forces? The fourth point. There is a tendency in higher education to move away from teaching and studying the humanities. What I recommend to universities who want to make contribution to develop citizenship is to bring humanities to their academic programs and curriculums. But what humanities? I have to say, I have been in Chicago, at the University of Chicago, trying to make local something with science there. And the first thing we have to do you know the basic program at the University of Chicago? Well, the first thing is to take the great books of all culture. So global culture is not about persons only. It's about thinking. It's about ideas. It's about culture. It's bringing great books to a great conversation. So we begin with whatever great author of whatever culture we want. Just talk about Marx. And why don't Marx talk with Confucius? Why don't we talk about what Quetzalcoatl thinks? Why don't you think Mexico has philosophy? Why don't we have history? Why don't we have our own logic? Why don't we talk about our authors? It's a time for a great conversation, not only for this kind of conversation. Thank you.
Thanks to all. We have about 15 minutes. We'll have questions from the floor. Start over here.
Thank you very much. This panel was great. When I was coming here and we talked about it at the airport, I was strongly convinced of the non-existence of global citizenship. And when Professor Handler and all of you presented, this changed radically. I do think there is global citizenship, but it's not the Tocqueville's type of citizenship. It's Hobbes and Locke. For Hobbes and Locke, citizenship didn't even mean birth, not even language. It was the ownership of property, the ability to elect, the possibility to travel within the realm, and those who were capable of exercising rights. Those were the citizens. Obviously, women were no citizens, and other ethnical groups in different societies that they studied were not citizens at all. So if we think in terms of Locke and Hobbes today, we see that there are some global citizens, like Murdoch or Carlos Slim. They're usually in the list of Forbes. Maybe Chapo Guzman, who's in the list of Forbes, is not a global citizen because he's a drug-dealing leader, but he's in the list of Forbes. Hillary Clinton doesn't speak Spanish, but she's a global citizen, the Pope. I don't think that the President of the United Nations, the Secretary General of the United Nations even gets to the status of a global citizen. All of these names I've provided, and probably maybe more, can elect officials in other countries. The Pope almost turned over the election in Brazil a few weeks ago by chastising the woman who finally won the election, accusing her of being pro-choice. And he made a strong impact. And Hillary was there, also trying to make the Brazilian election go in one direction. Hillary has said that the Mexican state is a failure. She is exercising power, and certainly she has the power to define an electoral outcome in many, many countries. So maybe we have to establish this difference. You have all talked about it, between both global awareness, global competence, global skills, because we put ourselves into like a travel log view of globalization. And to think of global citizenship would be the task of how do we move from a lock and Hobbes view of who are global citizens today to a different view. And then we have to think, what is a democratic global citizen that is inclusive? I would say, and with this I will end my participation here, should we all, citizens of the world, be able to vote in the US elections and decide who's going to be the leader of the free world that is going to be so important for all of our countries? Probably the outcome of the elections would be, it would certainly not be the Tea Party.
Thank you very much. Who's next? You all just want coffee, not your
I have a question. We all speak of global citizens, and I think someone alluded to the fact that we're also dealing with youth and with culture as well. There is a vibrant global culture. So there's a lot of literature out there about sort of this Afro-Brazilization of youth, the modernization, and so forth. It's sort of ironic because the universities, as sort of privileged institutions, seem to have that. We bring these young people into our midst, whether it's in Charlottesville or in Beijing or other places, and somehow, somewhere, this globalized youth culture seems to be sort of now put aside. Is that a problem? Is that a challenge? Or what is it? I'm just sort of asking that as a question.
Well, I'll answer in three. I will offer an anecdote in 3 sentences and then send it on. I thought a lot about this. In this global development studies major that I run, there are about 50 kids, and quite international or multicultural or that's really interesting. In the classroom, they can all do U.S. teenager to perfection. So that's not an answer, but it's a further anecdote supporting your question. Does anybody in the room or on the panel want to respond further to that fascinating question? Caroline?
Yeah. I mean, again, it gets to what knowledge is privileged by higher education institutions. And, think about it. It's a machine. It's a corporate entity about what gets valued, what is important, what research is acknowledged, what voices are heard in classrooms. And, although we think of academic institutions as being a pretty free and open space, there's pervasive cultures in different institutions that let you talk about certain things and not about other things. And so we haven't come to a place within higher education where we're really opening up the space to think about other voices or approaches. And that stuff happens on Facebook. It happens outside. It doesn't happen as part of our pedagogy. And that's what I mean about radically transforming the kinds of pedagogy through what voice we get.
I think we have another thought up here.
I don't have a specific comment to your point, but I would like to say higher education in America is a complex and multi-armed thing, and not all of the kind of woe is me that we express and hear at UVA is applicable everywhere. So just to be the Pollyanna for a moment, those who know me know I am no Pollyanna, but my alma mater, Bennington College, under the leadership of Liz Coleman, is working to a very different structure of an academic institution. It is focusing its structures around societal issues. So they are very committed to addressing positively issues that are global, whether it's climate or the health, and creating clusters, interdisciplinary clusters, including the humanities and including the arts, to speak about those issues. I think it is useful to try to focus on some of the positive things that are happening in academia, rather than just, we have so many flaws, the list is endless. But the question is, how many of us, if presented with the opportunity of truly hitting the barricades of higher education, would really support this in something more than pronouncements? Of course, Liz Coleman is encountering some resistance, and of course, some of the things she says are truly over the top, but there are institutions that are doing something different. I just wanted you to be aware of it, and those of you who are in higher education studies may want to look at it as an example.
Websites.
Yeah, I would agree that what Elena and Carol would say about that for a global democratic citizenship, they need to discuss ethical values, principles, and all that. The values of inclusion, the values of tolerance, the values of plurality. And my question is where and how, and from what point of view? I mean, what ideas do you have about that? Because it's going to be, as always, from a Eurocentric or US-centric point of view. And it's going to be this international and world service where there is, again, it's not the hegemonic knowledge, hegemonic power global too. So how to discuss those values and how to bring them into the university particularly?
Yes, please.
Well, I think that's the challenge. I think that when we are talking about global citizenship, we are talking about what we want to be the inhabitant of the future. But if we are not that kind of inhabitant first, we cannot be the future. So we have to take our time. We have to fight. We have to respond political, to act as Hannah Arendt said. I think it's time to take our time, not a technical time, not technological time, but human time. Because if we want the future to be human, we have to act.
You see one to respond?
Yes, I think that what I find interesting with this discussion is the fact that we are trying to understand what does a global citizen mean. And I think that this opening this question is useful in itself. And I will not assume that there will be one hegemonic answer to this question, but I think that the discussion is key.
So we are almost out of time. Guevara wants to make a remark, and probably that should be our last remark before we break.
Both question and a comment. Richard, I thought you gave us an extraordinarily fine start to this morning's discussion. But in a room of academics, one of the things that invariably happens, academics are analytically rigorous people. And therefore the focus is usually on what it is, rather than what it might be. And we have looked at global citizenship too much in terms of what it is. Today there is no such concept as global citizenship. To be a citizen, you have to be a citizen of a country. You have to have a passport. It is invariably linked to a geographical territory. Now, if you think about citizenship itself, it's a very, very new concept. Citizenship did not exist a little over 200 years ago. Prior to that, only a sense of identity was your tribe, your primordial loyalties. These have all changed all in all. Now, although we talk of global citizens, we talk of global world, and we then say, well, none of these things exist. But today, if I were to say there is a global government, most of us will disagree. But if you look at how national sovereignty is being eroded, and sovereign powers are being delegated and handed over to supranational organizations. Many parts of what used to be exclusively government is now supranational. Air travel would not be possible today if we did not surrender rights over our airspace. Again, what makes us think citizenship or passport makes us a citizen of a particular country? Today, most of us, many of us in this room, are citizens of particular countries. Passport is nothing but a travel document, a document of convenience which we use for traveling from one place to another. My own daughter is a citizen of 4 countries. Does that leave much about citizenship? No. So I really think what we need to be thinking about in this global, in a changed circumstances, we as individuals will have to be prepared differently, we will have to acquire different competencies, and we will have to think global, even though for a long time to come, nation state remains a reality.
I think that's a good place, although I would like to respond. I think you'd rather have coffee and fruit. So thank you to the panelists, thank you to the audience.